Well, how are we, mate? It's the 200 Cop. Schultzy, how you going?
Mate, I am going great. In fact, I'm going to start off this episode, uh, mate. There's over 160,000 people who've actually listened to your voice in the last week.
Those poor buggers. Pretty sure you can get something. You can get something from the chemist for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for everybody listening, we had a reel on Instagram about post turtles. Apparently, it was very, very popular. I'll just quickly brush over it, but out of that one reel, we've had 200 over 257,000 views. 166 people have listened to it. 166,000, sorry, people have listened to it, and it's been shared 11,000 times. However, we have got a number of followers out of it, over 600, and our numbers are definitely going up on downloads through Podbean, mate. So yeah, what do you reckon?
Oh, that's good. That's what we want. We're not about making silly reels. We just sort of do it because it's what you do. But that's good, mate. It's all positive.
Well, yeah,
That saying's not mine. I wish I invented that saying. It's a really good one, the old post turtle. But it's yeah, no, it went a bit silly, so that's good.
yeah. Well, mate, we had over 100 comments in relation to it, and some of them are just are ridiculous. We're not going to go through all of them or many of them, but yeah, there are some funny ones. I think a lot of them actually said government. There's a lot of post turtles in government. That was a very popular popular thing to say, and there was one with the recent breakup between the Nationals and the Libs, and one
No,
goes, the Nationals just saying to the Libs, "Just hold my beer, I've got
yeah,
this
yeah,
one." So
yeah,
I thought that was pretty funny considering the circumstances recently.
yeah, yeah.
um, and
But what I found funny, actually, one thing I did, I think I looked at it once all week. I've been pretty hectic this week, but I did find it funny that I no longer mix in circles where I associate with very negative people or with crooks or anything like that anymore.
yeah,
And I haven't been sort of abused for a long time, and I must have been missing it a bit because it was hilarious reading some of the real anti-police stuff coming back, and it was just like, ah, oh, there they are again. I got my little fix, you know.
it is actually funny, isn't it? Because you do miss it a bit. And I like a bit, when they sit there and go, oh, cops are useless or pack of thugs and all that sort of thing. I go, oh, get out of your mummy's basement. Come
Yeah,
on.
I gotta love it. Gotta love it. Yeah, because chicks dig bo, bad stinky feet, and bong breath. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah,
Oh dear. But yeah, mate,
yeah,
like some of the comments have been pretty funny, and thanks for everybody that engages. It's kept me entertained, that's for
yeah,
sure.
no, all good.
Over last week, and yeah, and thanks for listening. But mate, I think we need to move on to something you want to have a quick chat about.
Yeah, so I don't follow the news a lot. I sort of just do it every now and then, but I'm still friends with a lot of people on Facebook from hundreds of friends from the NT. And I didn't actually know that. I wasn't aware earlier on that my old mate Mickey D, so Michael Dutram, for those who don't know, he was a former Northern Territory police officer who committed suicide while serving. He was one of the ones I spoke about that in early 2022 I lost three. Well, I lost two mates and I lost one bloke I knew. So Gary Smith I didn't know well. That's in the public domain as well. The other fella who took his own life was a good mate, like a very very good friend of the family. Our kids were friends, and the third one was Mickey D. So Michael Dutram committed suicide in I think it was April 2022. I could be wrong there. I'm sorry if that's not the right month. I think it is April, but without having anything in front of me, that was when it was. I remember getting the message and it hit me like a brick because I couldn't believe it. And the reason I couldn't believe it was because Mickey D was the nicest bloke in the Northern Territory Police. And that sounds like a throwaway line that you say after a bloke's died, but it's not, because we used to say it when he was alive.
Yeah,
Mickey D, I've got a couple of examples working with him. I didn't work with him. He was a senior guy. He joined in '99 when I was in high school. So he was just one of those blokes. He worked frontline the whole time. When I had a fair bit to do with him, I was a shift sergeant at Darwin City, and he was running the social order crew that was based out of Nightcliff early on, like the really into 2017, 2018, 2019, and he just had this magnificent ability to calm people down. And I remember one night I was in the watch house just doing some paperwork, or just I think I was charging someone, and they came in and they just said, "We're going to have to put this bloke who I was charging. He was calm, he was sober and calm. Said you're going to have to put him back in the cell for a minute. We're bringing in a bloke who's going ape shit." So I could hear the carry on in the sally port, which is the little area where they reverse into that gets sealed up with a big door, so they can't get out of the car and then run away. Anyway, I could hear that, so we just said, "Oh, I can't wait. You're going to have to jump back in the cell for a minute. We'll charge and bail you in a sec. I'm going to have to deal with this." Anyway, this fella comes in, and the constables had him, and he was carrying on. He was proper kicking off. They got him in, and then you'd slump them up against the counter so that you can search them and try and uncuff them. At that point, you really want to de-escalate them because you need to lodge them into custody and you need to carry out a health assessment and all this sort of thing. And I remember another car pulled up, and I saw a very slow walking Mickey D. I saw him walking in, and he always used to call me Damo, which is not weird now, but back then it was very weird because everyone called me Barb or Sarge, or it was never first name, but which is just police and military. That's how we roll. But he always did. He said, "Hey, Damo, how are you, mate?" And he came in. He always was very eloquently spoken, and just quiet and calm, and always had a smile. And he came in and shook my hand and said good day, and he said, "I'm just gonna." I'll bring him in. I'm just going to have a chat with my friend here. And he just walked over, and old mate's kicking off and headbutting the bench and trying to spit on police and all the rest of it. And Mickey D just put his hand on his back and said, "Now, what?" I can't remember the words, but it was just a magnificent de escalation. "Now, my friend, what is upsetting you so much?" Or similar. And it wasn't in a condescending way. You could, the genuineness of what he was saying was brutally obvious. And straight away, this bloke starts yelling and carrying on about what's going on because I think he picked up on the genuineness of Mickey D as well. And he's going, "Well, that's terrible. So you're obviously having a bad night. And oh, listen, it's not going to get any better if you just continue to carry on. But I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll do this and that." Anyway, I just watched and I remember smiling and going, "You're just a magician, Mickey." I mean, he's the only guy, like a lot of us. He didn't have an intimidating persona. He was just a very chill guy. I never saw him go hands on. I know he did, but I never saw him do that. I only ever saw that calming supervisory effect that he used to have. That walk in, put everybody at ease. He had an air of confidence about him, but he also was just a genuinely magnificent human. And when I heard that he'd taken his own life, I was just it was how the world would have felt when Robin Williams did it. It was like
Yeah.
of all the people, everyone else you'd be horrified, but you'd sort of, oh geez, that's terrible. But when Mickey D did it, no one could believe that it happened. So, and I think that might be the reason. I mean, the fact that there were 3 suicides in the NT police in a very short period of time was one thing, but the fact that Mickey D's, I mean, his fame, I would almost say, in the NT police, well before he took his own life, was everyone knew Mickey D. It was just everyone knew him. Anyone who spent any time in Darwin knew Mickey D, and they all loved him because he was just an absolute saint.
Yeah.
So, sorry, mate, what were you going to say?
Yeah, yeah, mate. I never met him, but I knew of him.
Yeah,
And I never worked in Darwin, but I knew of him well. There was a lot of people that spoke very, very highly of him.
yeah. So, I mean, I think moving on to the coronial inquest, I'll be really interesting to see what the outcome is, and I think it is all based around PTSD with him. He's gone to a hell of a lot of jobs. I know that his family released a statement, and obviously they mentioned how much he was loved and how the family is still massively struggling with what happened. And my thoughts go to them because even his brother Anthony is still in the job as well. Well, I think he's still in the job. He was a superintendent, but another really good straight shooting fella. But I didn't know him as well as I knew Mickey. So one thing they did mention was that we all know policing is tough. Policing in the territory is not only tough; it's also brutally relentless, and I think that that's fairly universal now. But it always was. The number of jobs per person, like per number of cops, was just insane. So,
Yeah,
and I think what they want to look at is that we need to make life easier because it's not easy, and the new way of the world where the level of accountability, the level of reporting is just such that I'd like to see if they do come up with some kind of solution. If they do bring in international experts or whatever happens, I don't know. I don't know what the outcome. I'll be very keen to see what the outcome is. But if Mickey D's death can be the catalyst for change in the NT, the way that we deal with welfare, then it's certainly not worth it. But I think at least something good has come out of it, because at the moment nothing good came out of that. We lost an absolute legend in the job. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. And I think we'll discuss it once some findings come out. It's not going to be for a long time. They're only doing the inquest now, but once the findings come out, I'll be very interested to have a look at them.
Yeah, mate. It was devastating, and I think it was actually 3 suicides in the first 3 months of that year, from memory.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It was pretty bad, and we definitely lost some really good people during that time, and it is a shame. And I think, yeah, exactly what you said, mate. It'd be interesting to see what the findings are, and hopefully we can support them better. And it was so. Just quickly, mate, I'll just move on. I
Mm.
was actually on another podcast today, which is going to get released soon. I'll give you more details on that later on. But a friend of mine asked me to come on as she started up a podcast, and anyway, she was talking about stuff in the job, and I mentioned about how the camaraderie has dropped, and I think that's part to do with a lot of the difficulties police are having at the moment. That we were a team back in the day, and I think there's many people trying to keep that team going. But it gets very, very hard these days because, like I said, if the other team got a later rest or something, everybody stay behind and help out, and that doesn't happen these days. And I think
Mm.
if you can do anything, try and create that team work back again, and so people can have somebody to lean on, and open up those conversations.
Yep, definitely, mate.
Yeah. So,
Mm.
but mate, I'm gonna, if you're happy, I'm gonna move on.
Yeah, mate. Yep.
So out of this post, we did actually get quite a number of people messaging us. And I'll go through them. Some of them are pretty funny because when it started to go off, I thought, oh well, I'll boost it. I've never boosted anything before, and apparently it actually says, it comes up and it goes, um, "Hi, whoever, let us know how we can help you." Anyway, so one chick said, and she said, "Hey, keep making the funny memes and do whatever you do, lot do apparently." But then she goes, "Oh, she goes, Ashley, I could get some help with the housework by any chance?"
Yeah, yeah, buddy, mate. I consider myself a domestic god.
Yeah.
Me and me alone, but I reckon I could definitely help out there.
Yeah.
I'd have to bump the hourly rate up. I'm not saying I enjoy it, but I reckon I'm pretty
No.
good at it. I was
um,
trained by the Australian Army how to clean stuff, so I reckon I'm pretty good at it.
and look, from personal experience, you are like dynamite with an iron. Um,
Oh
and
yeah,
that
Ken
was
crease a sleeve, Schultzy. Ken crease a sleeve.
and for anybody listening, the old uniforms, the old NT uniforms, had to be like, they had to be perfect, didn't they? Like,
Yeah,
they were really good to actually put good lines on.
yep. No, they were. Yep. Yeah.
um, and I'll just give a quick shout out to Peter, his ex Vic Pole. Apparently, he reckons our he's actually asked if he can sponsor us some good microphones because he apparently reckons he's getting ear cancer from listening to us.
How do you reckon we feel? We have to listen to each other all the time.
That's right. But look, for anybody out there, if you just give us feedback on the audio, I think we've cleaned it up a lot ever since we're recording a lot on Riverside.
Mm.
But yeah, if like give us some feedback, and I know a lot of our earlier ones were a bit painful, but we were still learning the job. But yeah, mate, and look, Peter, anything that can make us better, mate, we definitely appreciate it. That's for sure.
Yeah. There's one
And then,
about juvie crime. I think we were going to go on with. What was that one?
yeah, mate. So that's basically the one of the last messages we got. And he goes, he was keen to ask us both about if we would support establishing a youth boot camp for wayward kids in the Northern Territory. Like for me, definitely. I think, especially with I found when I was working out bush, if I could send a lot of the Aboriginal kids to learn more from going out to outstations, it saved a lot of trouble in the community, and it was better than sending it to prison. In saying that, there I always found out of the 15 or 20 offenders I had in especially one community, if I kept three of them out of that community, the rest were pretty well behaved. What
Yeah,
I really did find advantageous was we had quite a bit of sniffing out there, and to get them out to those outstations where they didn't have the influences was far better from them, and they learnt a lot more, and it took them away from the, I suppose, the temptation of sniffing. Mate, what are your thoughts?
yeah. So I think I want to start off this by using an inquest term, which is terms of reference, because I think we could go off on 1,000 different tangents talking about the best way to fix youth offenders. But I think if we just bring it in to say what we saw work that didn't involve prison, because the other thing is a lot that did work was prison.
Yep.
Some of these kids are too far gone. They're only ever going to be crooks, and that may sound defeatist and all the rest of it. It's not at all. It's just the reality. The fact is, I look at the juvenile crooks who we were locking up, in 2007, 2008. A lot of them are now serving very, very long terms of imprisonment for domestic homicide. There seems to be a direct correlation between prolific property crime offenders hitting 18 and suddenly being punished for that, and then in their early 20s and continuing through adulthood being really serious domestic violence offenders. That was just a correlation that I saw quite a bit. So this may sound negative, but the fact is that some can't be saved. We're not really talking about them. I think we're talking about what does work. How can you fix them basically? And look, boot camps are one thing. I think we can talk about that in a minute. But I just want to, before we talk about boot camps, I want to talk about something that I saw very early in my career that diminished a lot as my career went on, and that was Aboriginal cultural payback. So, for those who aren't sort of aware, that there's very much the old culture of payback out in the bush for serious matters. Unfortunately, used to collide directly with Western law enforcement pretty well. You had to balance it because back then there was no option; it was happening. And I'm talking the old taking them out in the bush, and it might be that there's a physical retribution, but then there has to be some kind of return from them, like they owe the community something. But then what I also loved about the way they did business was once it was done, it was done.
Yeah.
Um, I can't remember his name, but there was a bloke, and I can't. Oh, my brain's hopeless. He was either in Borroloola or Tennant Creek. I can't remember exactly where, but he walked everywhere with a limp. And I remember an old Aboriginal elder, or one of the older people anyway, explained it to me that years ago, so probably 15, 20 years before I'd even met them, he'd been he'd either he'd done I think he might have raped a girl, and his family that there was payback for that, but the family of the girl decided that he was going to die for that. He was going to get a spear actually through the leg, and it was going to be on the inside, not the outside. And anyway, I'm going to respect Aboriginal culture, but there's a few things that you're not supposed to talk about, but basically the way this fella explained it to me, and I mean he wasn't hiding anything, was back in the day, and I'm talking a long time ago, when a person was to be executed, what would happen was they'd spear them in the inside of the leg and they'd generally take out the femoral artery, and that'd be the end of them. If a person was to be punished, they'd be speared on the outside of the leg and it'd bloody destroy the thigh, but there's no absolutely critical, well, there are still a lot of blood vessels there, but there's no critical main arteries like your femoral artery. So basically, they'd get a big bad wound. They'd be very sick for a week or so, but then they'd come good. And they were basically, once they'd served their penance, they were forgiven. There was no issue. They were allowed to be in the community, and that was that. But yeah, the old thing was if you got speared on the inside of the leg, that was the end of you. Well, apparently, this fella was supposed to be speared on the inside of the leg, but they missed and actually hit him in the
Oh,
front of the leg, and it happened to go to the outside, and it caused him a catastrophic wound to his thigh, but it didn't kill him. So he obviously got the wound managed, and he kept the infection under control, and he survived. And they only got one bite at the cherry. So once that was done, that there was no more. That the matter's finished. It's dealt with, and he's paid his penance, and that's it. Hence the reason he's kind of accepted in community. He walks around with a limp permanently, but that was the old payback. Now, I'm not saying we get kids and we start spearing them in the leg. It's not going to work. What I am saying is that was an excellent deterrent in cultural ways back in the day. From what I'm told, it was a very good way of keeping people in check. But obviously, that's never going to happen here.
No.
What did work with those young offenders out in the bush was having some kind of there was generally a bit of a physical retribution. There might be a bit of a flogging or whatever else, but then it was all right, young fella, that's finished now. Now you fellas are going to learn the right way, and you're coming out bush with us. We go hunting. We're going to teach you fellas about the bush, and they'd go bush with nothing for potentially days and weeks and or
Yep.
even longer, and they'd basically just have to live with the old man out in the bush and do the thing and learn and be the young fellas, and that was how they were. And it worked beautifully. It was a really effective way of doing business. So before we go on to what I think about boot camps, I think that worked. And unfortunately, I don't know if that same strength is there now, but it certainly worked back in the day. So yeah, that was my thoughts. So what are your thoughts on those, mate?
Mate, yeah. Look, on my, I mean, I'll bring up an incident, and I think I mentioned it briefly a while ago on the podcast. But I had one kid that was out there, and he was when I first went out to Millingimby, and he was causing trouble. Anyway, I basically he was breaking into places and all that sort of stuff, and I spoke to basically caught up with him, and I'd met one of the elders out there at the time because I was only just new out there. Anyway, the elder came up to me and he said, "Look," he said, "I'm going to send him out to men's business. He's supposed to go. He's due to go. Blah blah. If you can, let him be." And so I spoke to the victims and all that sort of thing, and they were happy. He got sent out to men's business. I said, "All right." I said, "On one condition, you've got 2 weeks to get him out there, because the fact is, I can't allow crime to happen. And at one stage there has to be white fella consequences. I'm here to protect the community, and that's what I'm going to do." So anyway, I allowed him to get him out to men's business. Anyway, 2 weeks later, not gone. So anyway, I walked down there and arrested him and brought him in. And the elders come up to me and go, "No, you." I said, "No, I gave you 2 weeks. You have failed." I
Mm,
said, I gave you the allowance to do it blackfella way. Now we're doing it whitefella way.
yeah,
Because I cannot allow victims in this community if he's at large. I said that is, I swore an oath to protect people. And anyway, so went through it. However, the problem is back when we first started, the elders had a lot more control and a lot more. They were listened to a lot more. That unfortunately I saw diminish over the
yeah,
years. And so this elder was he had a bit of a he couldn't quite control the community the way he used to be able to, because as the generations move on, they lost more and more respect for the elders, unfortunately. But one thing that did work and what gave him a little bit of power back is we worked out a little bit of a system where he would enforce stuff, and we're not talking about spearing in the legs or anything like
no,
that. It
no,
was
no, no,
about taking him out to outstations and all this sort of stuff. But and getting him away from the, I suppose the stuff that triggered him into either sniffing or breaking in and all that sort of thing. And he would actually threaten the kids that if they didn't listen to him, he would pass them on to me. And they
mm,
knew that I wouldn't muck around. And I was happy to play the bad guy, because at the end of the day, he saved face, the elder did, but
mm.
it also gave him power, and people started listening to him, or especially the young kids started listening to him, because they would rather be dealt with by him than with me. And not that I was doing anything bad, I was just sending him off to jail, or,
Yeah, just
putting
it's the
conditions
way
on.
they're dealt with. It's just yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, mate, that's probably when you're talking about that sort of stuff, I found
Mm.
that very effective in actually giving the elders a bit more power back. They could use me as a bit of a, um, I don't know, what do you call it, linchpin, I suppose.
Oh, just the bad guy. You use the
Yeah,
blame, sort of. Yeah, you got to like the leverage almost.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. So I'll move on to boot camps, and look, I'm not an expert. I don't know a lot about them. Um, they, they'd be hard going. They'd be bloody hard to run. It takes a very, very special person to be able to do that sort of job and not completely lose your temper. And I mean that. Like, I couldn't do it. I wouldn't want to do it. You've got to have a you've got to have the patience of a saint to do that. But it has to also there has to be punitive yet team building and outcomes result like an outcome based, and you also you need to build them up. You sort of need to break them down a bit at the beginning, and then you need to build them up. It's called a boot camp for a reason. I've been to
Yeah.
boot camp. Um, I'll never forget. I did 9 weeks initial cadet training. It was for the Australian Regular Army as a staff cadet, so training to be a commissioned officer in the army at Duntroon. And our first 9 weeks was out at Camp Blake, which is just out of Canberra, basically out in the sticks. No contact with anyone. We were in little pretty basic sort of huts, and we just trained out there with pretty very basic sort of facilities. Um, but the beginning of it was absolute shell shock, and that was good because it sort of breaks everyone down and makes everyone equal. And then you build as a team. So by the end of that 9 weeks, you're a very close knit team, and that was good and done well. They can be done very well. I just see if they certainly if they are contracted out, there's just they would have to have a lot of oversight. There's certainly been plenty of attempts at similar things, and there's some horror stories from international experiences. The US was big on them, especially in the 80s and things like that. I can't remember the name of it, but there was a fellow who used to run groups in the desert, and basically they'd have to navigate and pack march and all the rest of it. And I think initially they were good, but after a while, he built the business side of things more so than the. It wasn't so much a penalty; it was more for wayside youth, and it was a private enterprise, so that people would send their kids to this thing. But what they do is they'd actually go and kidnap these kids and take them in, and I mean that's traumatizing. I don't know if that's going to work. That's just going to traumatize the shit out of somebody. But if they know it's a sentence and you get inducted into something and it's done sensibly and then it's ramped up, so there's full trust straight away. They're not coming from a place of terror, thinking they're being kidnapped. They're coming from a place of you're now going out to this place and you're going to be broken down and built back up as a team member and doing the right thing, working together and understanding that. I think by the end of these boot camps as well, they're given responsibility and actually asked to teach some things and all that. So they actually become not instructors, but they become mentors to others who are new to the program and this sort of thing. And I can
Yeah.
certainly see a benefit of that. Um, Look, anything's better than nothing. Prison used to be a bit like, or not prison, but juvenile detention certainly used to be a little bit like that. I know it was a lot of horror stories and there's a lot of negativity there, but I mean, you got to remember the kids aren't in there for stealing a bottle of Coke. We're talking about aggravated robberies. We're talking about stolen cars, but not one. We're talking lots and lots of stolen cars, lots of victims. We're not talking about kids that have just slipped out of line. We're talking about kids who are dangerous. They're dangerous to society. And then you've also got to come to that point where you draw the line in the sand and go, well, no, this person's not suitable for that. We just need to remove them from the community, and they're basically the ball's in their court. And that might sound harsh, but I'm sorry, but when you've got a criminal history of 267 at the age of 15, every time you go to juvenile detention, you assault the staff. The second you get out, you go on a crime spree that night, which includes aggravated robberies where you actually injure people who are working in service stations or bottle shops or whatever else. And then you drive stolen cars at warp factor 9 at night and think it's hilarious. Well, there's not a lot of saving them, especially when they don't know anything else.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's my 2 cents there, and I can hear critics, and that's fine. But I mean, I've seen this firsthand. You've seen it firsthand. There'll be lots of other people who have as well. I'm really interested to hear from people who might know a bit more than me because I certainly don't claim to be an expert at this stuff. And maybe
No.
some people who've worked in juvie detention centres about what they've seen work and what hasn't worked, and whether I'm wrong about some people can't be saved.
Mate, look, my 2 cents worth, and I agree with you. There are definitely some people that cannot be saved. I pride myself on being able to approach different offenders differently, depending on what was going to, be the best outcome, especially with the, limiting the use of force and all that sort of thing. And look, there was a number of kids, and I've mentioned those three that were a million. Give me if I could, they were bad. They were just the only way I could actually protect the community is having them in jail. That
Mm,
boot camp wouldn't have worked for them. I think what's also important. Look, I saw a thing ages ago, many years ago, probably almost a decade ago, where they it was in America, and they were bringing kids that were getting into a life of crime, and they bring old, ex-cons, and these ex-cons were yelling at them and telling them, what how bad they are and on all that sort of thing, and everybody's going, "Oh, it's fantastic, needs to be done here." Well, no, that might work on some, but it won't work on all. Everyone is different on how you approach them and how you. If you want to actually rehabilitate people, everybody is different. Like every time we went to a job demo, we would change the way we spoke to whether it was a victim, whether it was an offender, whether you
Yeah,
wanted to de-escalate, whether you wanted to get more information. We changed constantly depending on the personality of the person we were dealing with. And it's the same when you want a good outcome with offenders. However, there are some that just cannot be saved. It's
yeah.
and yeah, I don't think there's. I mean, you might get a couple of do-gooders saying, "I know everybody can save," but no, some of these kids were just pure evil.
Mm.
And there was no
And
reason.
look, what is it? There was a good saying that, I mean, it's not certainly none of these sayings are mine, as I keep saying, that hurt people hurt people.
Yeah,
So that is that these kids were victims. Absolutely, they were victims of extraordinary neglect, more than likely physical and sexual abuse. Most of the time, fetal alcohol syndrome. Uh, you name it, they've had it. But the trouble is, what they've got now is that they are very dangerous to others. So, while taking into consideration what's happened in their past, there is also a responsibility for protecting future. You have to break the chain.
yep,
And without family support, I think it's very difficult for a lot of these people to do this. I think it's the government certainly can only do so much. Um, it's got to be family. Families number one. Families core for the for a lot of the cultural things in the Northern Territory as well. It's all about family.
yeah,
So when that family support's not there, when you've got kids who have been wards of the state, which is not what they're called anymore, but basically in the care of Territory families, I think it is, when they've been there for just years and years, they don't have a family. Their family are their mates in that stolen car screaming around the place with them. That's their family. So, look, that's very difficult. It's hard on them. It's a harsh thing, but I just don't hold out a lot of hope for some of them. And I mean, when I was at Trident, so Strikeforce Trident in 2019 and then early 20 before I went into the COVID side of things, we dealt a lot with these kids, like almost exclusively, not quite because we just dealt with serious and complex property crime, but a lot of that was caused by these roaming packs. And you knew that if you locked up, like you'd already said, if those three kids were out of Millingimby, you didn't have a problem. Well,
yep,
Darwin's a lot bigger than Millingimby. So if we had a core group out locked up, we knew that we'd have some respite. Well, not just us, the community would have some respite from the breaks. And you might go a week with very few. There were always break-ins. I can't remember a night where there wasn't one, but it might be completely unrelated to the core, really bad, the group that were causing all the dramas. And when they were all out, and you knew it, like there was quite often a time they'd all be arrested together, and they'd appear on one day. All of them would go to court pretty well after each other and be granted bail on certain things, and you just knew that night was going to be absolute mayhem because they've all got out, they've all hooked back up, and brass, and they just go and break in. And we had them all with ankle. I'll never forget it. We had ankle monitors on these kids, and we can't track them real time, but we can track what they've done afterwards. And we were watching the recording of them, well, basically the printout of what they'd done, and they'd entered every single property in one of the suburbs in northern Darwin until they'd found an open door or some way to get into a house. And they just, like you can see, they walked in, walked around, walked out, walked into the next house, walked around, walked out. Obviously, checking doors, checking car doors, checking fridges, doing whatever else. Find an open door, go inside, steal the car keys, two cars gone. And then next minute we've got a drive off, a petrol drive off, or we've got a ram raid, or we've got this, and then you'd have a crime series, and that'd involve multiple stolen cars. Then you'd have more stolen cars, and if you caught up with them through the night, you'd have multiple pursuits. And I mean, except for the time of night, which was the only safe part about it, was that they were happening generally in the early hours of the morning. They're extremely dangerous, and you can't continue them on. We'd have to terminate the pursuits constantly. I wasn't often on duty at these times, but I'd often review the jobs afterwards. I was on duty a lot when I was in general duties, but not so much as the detective sergeant at Trident. But you just you'd see them dealing with these kids night after night, and then all of a sudden you've got all the same names in the watch house again. and all
Yep.
going back through the system. And it just happened over and over again. And when they were in jail, it all stopped.
Yeah. It's amazing how that happens. Like like basically crime just drops through the floor, because all these people are in custody. And I actually, on a funny one, I had one of these. I'd always wanted to get through a Christmas in Millingimby without a break in. Anyway, I'd got all three of these locked up, and there was one that got locked up just before Christmas, and I thought, oh yes, I'm going to get through the holiday period. Unfortunately, the judge gave him bail just before Christmas. And what do you know? Within 48 hours, I had a break in for Christmas, and I was
Yep.
just so pissed off. I mean, he was quickly behind bars again, but I'm going with his history. There's no way in this world he should have been let out, and it ruined my perfect streak of actually wanting to have a Christmas where there wasn't a break in. Because when you're thinking about Christmas, these are important times for the people out there. It was a teacher's house that was broken into. They've got lives, they've got, that they don't want the trauma of having people break into their house. So you've got to understand that as much as these people care about the offenders, we care more about the victims.
Yeah. Victims haven't done anything wrong. People
No.
remember that. And the other thing is, I always like this one too. It's a firefighter analogy. It was to do with people who are saying, "Oh, you've got to save the park. Don't worry about the house." It's like, all right, who owns that house? Not you, righto.
Yep.
So the first house we're going to burn down is your house. Now you're
Yeah.
more motivated, aren't you? Someone
Yeah.
owns that house, and that's the thing. Is people can go, "Oh yeah, there's victims," but these guys, righto, no worries. Who do you love more than anyone else in the whole world? Right. Well, they're the ones who are going to be traumatized by this scumbag tonight. Are you
Yep.
still willing to let that happen? Oh, no, that's right. Not in my backyard. So
Yep.
you're not willing to let it happen to your own family, so don't let it happen to anyone else's. And
Yep.
that was
That's
the old test. It was the custody test back in the day. Treat people how you would like a member of your family to be treated similarly circumstanced. And that
yep.
was and it might be that they need force used against them back in that circumstance. But I like that in all walks of life. It's righto. If you're willing to inflict pain on someone else, it is you or your nearest and dearest who get inflicted first. And all of a
Yep.
sudden, watch the cog spin in the head then.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, mate.
it's that thought.
That's exactly right. And I completely agree with that. In talking about actually boot camps, there was a couple. I don't know. They weren't overly officially set up, but there was some that was set up, and I did try and use them from time to time. And the courts, usually the magistrates, if we had somebody that we that it was very hard to remand because it was early on. I remember I had three juvies at one stage that were petrol sniffing, and if they actually sniffed again, they could possibly die. They were 13, no criminal history whatsoever, they apart from breaking in recently and all that sort of thing. But I had to stop them from sniffing petrol, and I did actually call the magistrate because I said, "We've got to remind the only safest way to actually protect these kids is actually put them behind bars where we can monitor them."
Yeah,
And anyway, he actually we had a chat about it, and he said, "I completely see where you're coming from. Unfortunately, I mean, the law never supported them getting remanded,
yeah,
but of course, I was looking out for their health." And anyway, we actually spoke to a few elders, and we made an agreement that they would go out to this outstation where they would be monitored by a few selected elders, and they would spend their time until it was time for court, and that was their bail conditions. And the judge said, he said, if these rules are breached at any time, here is my number. Call me personally, and he said I
yeah,
will have them remanded.
yeah. And that was the
Because
beauty of youth diversion. Did have that flexibility. I know they were on bail. It wasn't the finding of guilt, but
yeah,
youth diversion certainly did work for those entry level crooks, those young kids who are just entry level down. I wouldn't even call they're not crooks. These are entry level kids starting to be led down the wrong path, whatever else. I've seen a couple of times where youth diversion worked beautifully, and we never heard from those kids ever again. So,
yeah,
and that's where you could come up with creative solutions. A lot of that was to do with actually facing the person who was the victim, um, and that was obviously, for a lot of people who weren't. I'm not talking about the kids who are way beyond. That was a very confronting thing for a lot of these kids, and it worked. It was exactly what they needed to pull them back online. And once
yeah,
again, we're not really talking about the kids who pinch a bottle of Coke from a shop. We're talking about They might have done a bit more. They might have damaged a car, burnt a car, stolen a car. They might have broken into a house once, things like that. And they were quite often pretty good candidates for diversion. Um,
Yeah.
when we had people who were being considered for 15 different cases for diversion, I'm sorry, but the whole purpose has been defeated. So, that's, I think, what we're on about there.
Yeah, mate. If I just to cut in there, like for anybody that's sitting there and listening to this and thinking, I mean, I've heard about the argument about raising the age of criminal responsibility and all that sort of thing. Um, the the problem is you're taking away the power of the police and the judicial system to actually do something, and just because they've committed a crime, it doesn't mean, especially for entry level, we're not going to sit there and remand them and throw them in jail. That is not our what we want to happen. What we want to do is stop them offending. Our main job is to prevent further
Mm.
recurrence of that crime. So we will do everything in our power. And mate, you mentioned diversion. Diversion, it did work very well for some people, and that is our first line of that. Well, that's our first step. If you arrest somebody
Mm.
without a criminal history,
Youth,
that's our
kids. We're
first
talking
step.
about kids.
Yeah,
I'll just
yeah,
cover the whole
that's right.
thing. We're not talking about adults here. We're talking about kids. The
Right.
whole conversation's about kids. Yeah.
Yeah.
Under 18.
Yes. So it and this is the thing, there is so many steps we had to go to, like some of the stuff I've actually seen come out, and some of it's one was on Amnesty International, which was completely inaccurate, and it pissed me off because they were saying kids as old as 10 were just locked away and remaining in custody. Well, yeah, if they've done something seriously bad and they've got a long history of it, but
Yeah.
we don't just go and find a 10-year-old that's, like you said, stolen a bottle of Coke or even broken into a house and throw them in jail and lock up the keys. That doesn't happen.
No.
So,
No.
for anybody that thinks that does, you are completely incorrect and wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Um,
true.
and unfortunately, that's some of the perception. But yeah, mate, I've had youth diversion. We used it, I think, in Borroloola. The kids got out and spray painted the road, and did quite quite some bad images on the road. And
Bit
part
of
of the
interpretive
agreement
art,
was,
mate. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And one of the agreement was the council actually got the paint, and we made them go out there and cover it up.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
one of the one of the biggest ways to stop graffiti is within, I think it's 48 hours. If you get them to remove that graffiti, there is something like 70% chance it won't happen again.
Yeah. Yeah. It
It's
wouldn't
something.
surprise me. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. And look, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they were the stats. If you can get onto graffiti very, very early, it's very unlikely that person will reoffend.
Yeah.
Um, and we're talking about just low level graffiti, not of course people that love doing it as a history, because once they've probably already done 100 times and they see their tag everywhere, it's not going to matter.
No.
Um, but yeah, mate, that's my 2 cents worth, and I have seen a couple of boot camps or youth camps, I would say, and we try to use them as much as possible. But I'd like to see something official, and like you said, it would have to be very well monitored. You would have to have special people out there. Like you said, it needs dedicated people with definitely a lot of patience. But they also have to be hard and draw a hard line in the sand. So it's what we
Yeah.
spoke
It
about.
would it would take a very unique person to be able to do it for any length of time. I know I couldn't. Yeah, it would just. I think you need people with skin in the game. You might need people who've come from a background like that and really know the outcomes. Um, yeah, I think that's where you'd feel like you really need to give back. And I think, yeah, it would take a very special human to be able to do it. And I'm not that
Oh,
special. So,
and you'd have to be dedicated to it. It's yeah. But look, I'm definitely if the government could get their act together and stop arguing so much and
mm,
put something like that in place, I would support it. That is for sure.
yeah,
If as long as it was done properly.
yeah,
Don't do this. We're going to throw like $250 billion at it or whatever. And then not look at it. It has to be structured. It has to be done well,
mm. Yep, I reckon that'll do, mate. But
mate.
yeah,
I
I think the
reckon.
big one out of this is that we certainly we're no experts. We know what we know, but we're no experts. So I'd like to hear from someone who knows a bit about this, who might have done a bit of research into it or been involved in a boot camp or a juvenile detention center, detention facility or something similar.
Yep.
And yeah, let us know if we're wrong. Tell us if we're right. Tell us, like, just bring the conversation back. So
And and also, if you have got experience in it and you do know a lot about it, give us a call and you can come on the podcast and actually speak about it because,
yeah, yeah,
I'd like to hear from an expert or somebody that's got some real skin in the game.
yeah,
Exactly, what because I mean that's what we're also about is getting information out there on stuff we don't know, and we've always prided ourselves. And if we don't know the answer, then we talk to people who we know who does.
yeah.
So yeah, but anyway, mate. I reckon that's just about us.
That'll do us. It's the 200 cops, but we'll talk next week. We're still trying to find our bloody elusive mate. We'll track him down.
Ray
Yeah,
Musgrave,
yeah,
and I believe you're trying to get one too, mate.
yeah, yeah. And he goes, "Oh, geez, I haven't done anything last week. I could have done it then." It's like, "Well, ring me, mate." Anyway, we'll get him on. We'll get him on. It's all good. Not
Yeah,
to
no,
worry.
we have actually got a few lined up, but just trying to get them lined up to come on a podcast. But yeah, we will get there because even my dad said he really likes where we actually have a guest speaker. Not that
Yeah.
he's sick of talking, listening to us, but he
No, he's
probably
sick
is.
of us, mate. He's sick of us.
Right?
Yeah,
But he actually really liked Peter,
yeah,
the paramedic. He really enjoyed listening to that, and I think it just gives a different point of view.
yeah. No,
You
that
know,
was excellent. That was it. It was an eye opener for me too. Like just to hear the other side, the similarities and the differences were interesting. I thought so.
yeah, definitely.
Mm.
But anyway, mate, let's see if I can get a reel that gets as popular this week, and yeah, we'll see you all next week.
Rightio, all the best.